Yes, we went on vacation, found a school, and had a sale, but there was a lot of thinking when we got home. We wanted to be sure that each one of us knew and were really ready to see what was going to happen, because the future we didn't know. And we both hated to leave. We admitted that. And we had to decide, well, will Linda be better here or we'll go? We knew that for Linda's sake we had to go. But it would be a lot of work and a lot of decisions to make before we left. And so one of the first things that we had to do was cancel the order for the cattle. And that was probably one of the hardest things that Kenny had to do, because he'd worked so hard getting the barn certified. And we really didn't know what that venture would have been either, because we didn't know for sure what we were going to have to do, whether we'd sell to a creamery, and we knew we weren't going to pottle and so on. But anyway, that was the first thing we done, was to cancel the cattle. And then I got to thinking back one day. He said there'd been a lot happen since Linda was 3 years old. And so I was just thinking some of the things that had happened. Kenny's folks had built their house, and it was all finished, and they'd moved in. She only had one cabinet on one side, and she wanted one on the other side of the sink to match this one. Well, so she was going to order one, so Kenny said, well, I'll build you one. And so he did. It probably took him a week or so, but anyway, his mom got a cabinet built, and it was pretty near identical to the one that they had bought commercially, or whatever they whatever they were. The next thing was the summer that Billy Anderson came down. And one evening, I don't know how it happened, but Bill Randall and Kenny and I went to town, and Kenny's folks weren't home. And Billy Anderson stayed over in their house while he was here. And he was getting ready to take a shower, or a bath, and a thunderstorm came up. And it was similar to the one that Thelma and I had been through, because it rained and the lightning and thunder was terrible. Well, the lightning struck Kenny's folks' house, and it didn't do any damage on the outside, but it came inside and caught a scarf that the radio set on a little stand, and it caught this scarf on fire. So we pulled it off and put it in the sink right quick and turned it on. Well, that lightning had got in the bathroom, and there was a metal strip around whatever kind of finishing they had on 2 or maybe 3 sides of the bathroom. And you could see where that lightning went completely around the top of that. It was just a dark line, and that lightning jumped from on that over to the sink, and it was dark all around the kitchen, all around the bathroom sink. So if Billy had been in there, he'd have probably been electrocuted. So Kenny had to clean that up, and he had to have the electrician come back out and do that. Kenny's folks probably lived in that house maybe between 2 and 3 years, and they decided they wanted to move it to Goodland. Now, why they wanted to move it to Goodland, I don't know, because they were born and raised in Wheeler, St. Francis community. Their doctor was there. They did all their businesses there, but no, they was going to move it to Goodland and put it on a block where Rhoda's folks lived. And so Kenny said, okay. He got in touch with the moving gang that he'd worked with about 3, 4, 5 years ago, maybe. And they said, well, yeah, they'd move it, but he'd have to ride on top of the house with one of the crew members when they went by electric or telephone wires, and they would have to watch for when they come to bridge it to see that there was clearance. And they would need a flagger to be in front and back. Now, why they needed all of this, I don't know. But anyhow, they agreed. And before they started, Kenny said, well, did you get it bridged over the basement? And, well, yeah, it's all right. And he asked them a couple times if they got it bridged over like it should be. And so when the day came they were going to do it, well, they started out, and Kenny's dad drove the flag car in front about a mile ahead, and I drove about a half mile behind. Linda was not happy to see her dad riding on top of that house. But anyway, things went fine till we went to Goodland, about 27 mile. And when we got there, well, they'd stopped, and Kenny asked him again. He said, are you sure those planks are strong enough? Yeah. They wouldn't even hardly talk to him about it. Well, they drove the truck across fine. It went fine. But when I don't know whether they were called dollies or what, but they started pulling the house across, got halfway across, and it broke the boards or logs or whatever they had, their bridge, and it went down front side down to the basement. And Kenny's was furious. I mean, I don't think he'd ever been madder, because he told him again before they stopped, are you sure? And he'd worked with them, and he knew pretty much, how strong it had to be. And Kenny's dad said, I think you better go home. He said, there's nothing you can do here. They're going to have to get some jacks. It's their mess. They're going to have to straighten it up. Well, before we went, they got a piece of his mind, let me tell you. And he said, if there's any damage done to the plaster in there, you know who'll take care of it. So we went home, and he fumed around all evening. And next morning we got started to town pretty early, and by the time we got there, why the guys were already working, and they had jacks underneath it jacking it up. And do you know when they got that on across and so on, there was only 2 little cracks in the plaster. It didn't do any damage, and of course none of their furniture or anything was in there. So they come out pretty lucky, but he was pretty much unhappy with that. And another thing that happened, we was talking about storms. Well, we 3 or 4 years in between, we had blizzards, and blizzards weren't too bad. I mean, no snow was piled up, and then they got rides on sleds and so on. One storm we had was kind of similar again, like I say, the one that we'd had when we were younger, Thelma and I. But anyhow, it was the middle of the afternoon, this storm came up, and it rained, and it hailed, and it hailed, and it hailed. Well, we had a corn crop planted about 4 or 5 miles from home, and it was a beautiful crop. Lots of people told us it was probably one of the best in the area, and the corn was as high as my head, and they just began to tossle out. And so when we went down there, the corn rows were completely full of ice and snow, and some of that hail was almost as big as golf balls. And it had hit and pounded so hard that you would never know that corn had been planted. There was not one stalk, and the telephone wires there, or lines there, were down, and hail was piled around the telephone poles. Oh, some places almost a foot high. It was, they said, one of the worst storms they've ever had. And so that was the end of the corn crop. And there was a place on the way to Goodland that was kind of a, I guess you'd call a gully. There was no bridge there, but when it rained, where the greater ditches would fill up and the water would go across the road. Well, this happened 2 or 3 times, and when the water would fill up like that, why, the county'd send out pilot cars, and you'd have to follow this car to get across the water, and that water would stay there, a couple weeks at a time. Well, the first couple of times we went across, Kenny always drove. Well, one day I had to go to town, but thank goodness before, Kenny had me drive across when he was in the car. He said, "Don't look at the water, just look at the car ahead." And we did. I didn't have a car, have any trouble, but the car right in front of me just went right over, right in the ditch. And the pilot guy kind of helped him out. But one lucky thing, he wasn't too far. And when he got out, he was saying, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday." I think he thought, I don't know where he thought he was going to go. And it was an out-of-state car, so he didn't know the area. So I guess you couldn't blame him too much. Another trip, it seemed like whenever anybody had to go anywhere, it fell on us to take him, really, Kenny. He had to take Hank, his brother-in-law, to Denver to see a doctor. We took the 2 grandmas, Grandma Days and Grandma Wick, up to Ray, Colorado, and they stayed a week. Who else we took? But it seemed like if anybody needed to go to Denver, it was us that had to take him. Well, of course, we didn't really object too much, but anyway, it seemed like we were on the road taking people quite a bit. Well, another thing, Linda's folks listened to the radio of these preachers a lot, and there was a preacher that said that he'd do his preaching and he'd say, "I can lay hands on people with handicap and they'll cure them." And so Kenny's folks wanted us to take Linda to Texas to see this preacher. And I said, "Well, I think if you had strong enough faith that it had happened, he could do it." But I said, that isn't my belief. And I think there's only one way that Linda could really be healed. And so we didn't go to Texas, but up towards we'd taken the 2 grandmas was a clinic, and it was a chiropractor place, and they do things in 6 stations. So they talked us into taking Linda there, and we did agree maybe this would help her a little bit. And so we took her up 2 or 3 times, and one day Kenny was working in the field, so Kenny's mother and I thought, well, we can take her. And so when we got to Colorado, it was about 50 miles up there, I guess. And I was probably driving about, 50 miles an hour. And we went a ways and we hit loose gravel. And the car started whipping across the road. It would be on this side and this side. It must have went over, probably not over 2 or 3 times, but it seemed farther than that. And I knew that I cannot put the brake on. I'd heard if you hit that, this car will roll. But I don't know whether I ever took my foot off the gas or not. And when we went on the right side, this one flipped back over that way. Why, I turned the car enough and we went right down the side and down the grader ditch. We were all right. Kenny's mother, she was just a nervous wreck. Because when I started down in the grader ditch, all she could see was a fence, I guess you'd call it a fence post, but it was about a 12-inch square, big, big board, a big fence post. And I didn't even see that. And there was a guy following behind us, and he stopped when he got up there, and he said, "That was some fancy driving you done." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, but you drive my car back up on the road." And he did, and he helped us. Well, Linda started crying, and I thought maybe she was hurt. And I said, "Are you all right, or where do you hurt, Linda?" She said, "I didn't want that man driving the car and leaving you down in the ditch." Well, I got in the car and we drove on into to Ray. Linda had her treatment, and we went home. And I was just didn't seem to bother me at all. But when I got home, I was shaken after I got to thinking about what could have happened. And this man that had helped us up, he said, Colorado is real good about leaving piles of soft sand. And so when we was telling Kenny's dad about it, that's the first thing he said. Colorado's real good about leaving loose sand on one of their jobs. Well, coming home from Ray, there was a road grader sitting there, but nobody was there. But the pile of loose gravel was gone. I mean, it was all smoothed out. So evidently they'd been out there and smoothed that out. But that was one trip that we'll never forget. A lot of different things happened, like I say, in those 3 years. One thing, like I mentioned before, Betty and Alvin come home on leave from the war. He'd been in the Korean War. And so Betty and Alvin had gotten married, and Kenny and Esther had both joined the church when right before we were married. Well, they were going to be confirmed. So Esther had this all planned out. She said, "You'll be my sponsor, and Ray will be, her husband will be Kenny's, and we'll do it all together." So it was fine with me. And when she told Kenny, he said, "No." He said, "If I go down that aisle one more time, her dad's going with me." So I wasn't Esther's sponsor, but Dad was Kenny's, and I think that kind of pleased him. And then we had a little celebration after that. That was one of the things that had happened after we decided to go to Oregon. Why, we had about 4 months to think about what we were going to take and what we were going to have ready for that sale and so on. Well, one thing Kenny did was buy a new truck. It was a big truck, and so we were going to take our things out there when we moved with us. And nothing really, he had to build a canopy to put on there. And so Jeanette Robinson, one of the friends that played cards with us and so on, she stopped. And so she said, "Well, we'll help you paint." So Jeanette and I painted probably 2 hours one day. But the only thing Kenny let us paint were boards that were not even show. And anyway, I think he probably repainted them after he done. And he got his whenever he had any spare time, why he'd work on this truck, and we had to sort out things to get ready to go. And but life still kind of went on. I mean, like I say, we had 3 or 4 months before we went over, so we still went fishing and doing things we did before. And I told you we did quite a bit of fishing. Well, usually Paul and Ardell and us went together, so was about, oh, I don't know, an hour and a half up to where we went up in Nebraska. And when we went, we usually either went in their car or our car, and we were packed in there. Well, let's say we were really, really scorched in there. Besides all the stuff we had to take along, they always took a 5-gallon cream can full of water with minnows in it, and that was in there. And so one time Kenny and Paul decided they'd take the truck, not the new truck, but Kenny's dad's truck. And I don't know how they ever talked Mardell and I into riding in the back, but they did. They put all the stuff in the back of this truck, and they put a couch in there that we could sit on going up there. Well, when they put the tarp over the top of us, it was blacker and blacker in there when they filled the top up. And Paul's kind of lived on a hill like it, in a real rough drive-in. So when Kenny turned around, everything started going every which way, and the lanterns they had hanging up went swinging, and Mardell and I were yelling at them to stop. Well, when we got up on the road, they stopped. Well, they had to do everything over again because Mardell and I did hold the cream can up so we didn't spill the water, but stuff was every which way. And we got that straightened up, and so we drove on up to Ogallala that day and went out to the lake, and this is one of those times you don't have very good luck. So the next day, we were all 4 of us there, and you could put your fishing pole in some kind of a holder, and you didn't have to hold it. Well, Kenny and Paul were just pretty close to where Mardell and I were fishing. We weren't having any luck, so Mardell and I started throwing rocks in the lake. Well, the guys didn't like that, told them we were going to scare the fish away. Well, so they moved on down a little ways. Well, Mardell and I thought, well, this is kind of fun. So we'd see how far we could throw them rocks. And there was another guy on the other side of us, and he wasn't any more happy with us than he was. But anyway, we kept throwing them in like that. Pretty soon one of our reels started going off, and we caught a fish. Well, we put it on the stringer and put it like they did. And Kenny and Paul didn't see us catch it, but the guy down here did. And we still was fooling around with these rocks, and we caught another fish. And by that time, he'd moved in right beside us. And he said, there might not be any fish here, but he said, I think you stirred them up. Well, pretty soon Paul and Kenny come back, and now fish aren't biting today. And this guy that moved in with us, he caught, you were limited to 2 walleye pike. That's what we fished for, or catfish or whatever. You can have all you want. And anyhow, he'd caught a fish or 2. And after that, they never said anything about us throwing any more water in, but any more rocks in the water. But anyway, the next day we had kind of a rubber raft with us, and we went over to the other side of this inlet. And coming back, I don't know why we ever started, but the wind had just started to blow, and we did have life jackets on, but the wind blew like crazy. And that raft or boat or whatever it was we were in, it was just bouncing all over. Well, we finally got over to where we were going, but boy, we all decided never again, because it's a wonder that we ever got there. Well, that was the end of that trip. But we did fish a lot, and we probably went more than we should have. And then gone back, why, Mardell, she knew that Kenny built this cabinet for his mother. And when she was growing up, her dad was a railroad man, and they had a pretty nice house. Well, when she married Paul, I moved in this old house, and it was a cement house. And it wasn't much, but Mardell had it fixed pretty nice inside, as much as she could, except the kitchen. And the kitchen cabinets were terrible, and the countertop was worse. I mean, it had bulges in it, and it wasn't sanding. She said, "Do you think you could recover those for me?" So he said, "Well, we'll try." Well, I got some kind of covering. I don't know. It wasn't Formica, but it was a heavy thing. So Kenny brought his power saw over. I only went over with him the first day. And Paul was there, and boy, and Mardell was telling Kenny what she wanted and how to do it. And I know him well enough that he never said anything, but he didn't listen either. But anyway, he did a pretty good job. He had to sand it and, I don't know, take out part of it and so on. Well, later, Mardell thought they were so good, and she decided, kind of as a thank you dinner, why she was going to have a candlelight dinner. And also, I think, kind of show off these counters. So anyhow, they'd been fishing again, and they caught this carp. Well, usually when you catch carp, they throw them away because they weren't a very good fish. And anyway, they caught a big one. So she was going to have this fish dinner, and it was supposed to be kind of a fancy dinner, candlelights and all this. Well, I know Mardell well enough to know that when she fixed this fish, she checks it several times. Well, when she got ready to take it out for dinner, I don't know whether there's too much fat on the fish or oil or what, but she opened that oven and there was nothing left of that fish but just the skeleton and a piece of skin or two. Well, here she had, I think there was 8 or 10 of us there. And Paul said, well, he said, there's nothing there, but we got some hot dogs, and so we can have hot dogs. And everybody said no. I mean, Mardell, she always had 2 or 3 casseroles and salads and so on, so no. Well, she'd also made this Jello salad, and she molded 2 different kinds of Jellos together, and in this Jello, I don't know, some of them had nuts or marshmallows or so on, and then she made a filling of some kind of something with whipped cream, and then there was 2 more layers of Jello. So altogether, this salad was about 4 inches high, and and we had the candle lights on and dinner, and thank goodness it didn't happen to Kenny or I. But anyway, it was just kind of semi-dark in there. And Paul, and I don't know who was sitting by him. Anyway, they picked up this Jello and went to pass it. Well, it was shaky, and the top layers went off on the floor. Well, you know what that did to the candlelight dinner. Paul said if you'd had the lights on, this wouldn't happen. Well, anyway, they cleaned it up, and needless to say, the candles stayed off and the lights went on. And anyway, the rest of the evening was fine. But Mardell never forgot that for a long time, that how her dinner party was really, really goofed up. So anyhow, as the sale grew closer away, we had these cattle, and Kenny took most of the cows one week to the sale, and I think he saved back one milk cow, because we weren't going to move over to the folks for a while, so he did keep one cow, but he's going to take the pigs in the next one. Well, he knew what I thought about pigs, but anyway, we had, I don't know, 4 or 5 about half-grown ones, and so we had a chute, and they went up and went in the truck, and then he put a divider in there so they couldn't get out. But then he had this one great big hog. I mean, she was probably weighed over 200 pounds, and he said, well, you may have to help me load her. And well, okay. So he had a probe stick and the end gate, and then he gave me I guess I had a stick, I don't know, but I know I had a board I was supposed to say. And so he says if she gets by, maybe if she gets down to this next one, she'll stop if we have any trouble. Well, she come over and the pig did and went up the chute just fine. But when she went to go in the truck, she wasn't going. And she turned around and she stuck her snout underneath that end gate that he had, and it just flew in the air. And when she come on down, she had her mouth open, and I know you could have put a quart jar in her mouth. It was that big. Well, when I wasn't staying there, when she started on down, well, when she got to where I was gone, and she went on around the pen. Well, in our corral there where they were, pig pen or so on, they had a wood fence, and it was kind of like a windbreak. And and it was made of straight boards, and they were fastened together some way. And I don't know just how they were, but anyway, they were at least 6 feet tall. Well, to this day, I don't know how I did it. I must have jumped up and caught the top or something. But anyhow, when that pig was settled down, I found myself sitting straddle one of them boards. And Kenny forgot about the pig, and he looked over and he said, "How'd you get up there?" I said, "I have no idea. I don't," because there I was sitting on top, straddled at this high fence like this. And I didn't know I was going to get down. And he come over and took onto my legs and lifted me, and I just slid over and he lifted me down. And he said, we'll let her cool off a little bit, and maybe she'll go in, and if she don't, why, we'll just take these pigs, and then next week, why, Hank can come over and help load her. Well, after she settled down a little bit, he got an ear of corn and gave her part of it, and led her up with that corn, and she walked right up the chute, right in the truck, and no more problems. Well, to say the least, I was not sad to see her go and get out of there. So anyway, she went to the sale. And each year when we were back there on those 3 years, Kenny was still driving the thrashing machine, and Hank was helping him. And so he did that every year. And and finished fixing his truck and so on. And we decided what we were going to sell. And we didn't have any machinery except the new tractor. We'd got a new tractor 2 years before. And so that was the only tractor, only farm implement we had. But the day they had the sale, it was a nice day, and it was really, really crowded. They sold everything, even the tractor, and went down in the field and sold the shocks. And like I say, it was still about a couple months or so before we went over to the folks. And anyhow, they sold everything, and then we decided what we were going to take and what we weren't, and we loaded up. As it got closer in time to go, we wanted to take most of our furniture, with the bed and beds and the bedroom set and the couch and a kitchen table and chairs and my cedar chest and and then of course all the linens and this type thing. And so he loaded all those up, and we were going to take them over when it got time and put it in the Quonset till we were ready to go. And okay, as the time grew closer for us to go, it seemed like the Pinnacle Club, and the friends seemed to get closer. We seemed to have more potlucks than we did before. And even the whole Pinnacle Club one time decided to go roller skating. Now, most of them probably hadn't roller skated for 10, 15 years. And I'd probably been one of the last roller skate because, well, we skated at home in the basement. And then I'd taken my school kids skating. And the rest of them, I know it had been a long time. Well, I wasn't a fancy skater like Joanne and Dawn. They could really skate, and Jay was a good skater. But anyway, we all went down to the skating rink, and I don't think some of them walked the next day because there were lots of spills. But anyhow, we all went. And then another thing, St. Francis never, hardly ever had a dance. The people that lived around St. Francis either went to Bird's City or Binkelman or Goodland to the dance. But there was a band called the Six Fat Dutchmen, and they were from Nebraska. Well, I think 95% of the people that lived around St. Francis were Dutchmen or German or something. And they had a dance at the Getz Club, and that place was packed. I think every Dutchman around went to it, and the crowd that Kenny and I went with, I think that we watched them people dance more than we danced because they did German dances and sang German songs, and those Dutchmen, they'd go down in the crowd and play whatever instrument they had. So we did go to that, but it seemed like that there was always an extra card game or something before that we went to. Well, finally we decided September the 15th was the day that you planted wheat. So Kenny planted the wheat around the last part of September. And I can't remember, I think the one milk cow that we saved back, Kenny's dad probably bought it for Esther and Ray. And Mother come over, and I don't know what we'd have done without her because she helped wrap all the dishes that we put in a barrel and packed the truck up, and moved over with the folks. And when we got over there, why we still went back over to St. Francis to the Pinnacle games. And Kenny used to go to the Stag over there, and when they did that, I usually went along, and the women would go to somebody's house, or else we'd all go to the show. But anyhow, our life kind of changed when we got over with the folks, because Kenny did some farm work for Dad, and Mother had decided that she wanted the arch between the dining room and the kitchen, dining room and the front room in her house took out. So Kenny took out his power saw again, and Dad went to Canerita. He said he wasn't going to stay there when the ceiling fell in. But anyway, Kenny and Mother knocked out the arch, and it probably took a couple of weeks maybe. But anyway, they made the dining room and living room all one big room, and it did give a little more room. And anyway, when we moved over there, why our life kind of changed. We went to the dance at Burlington, Burlington once in a great while, but we did go up to Hale again, and we started going with Reuben Peters. They came up to the folks probably once, maybe twice a week, and they'd play music. Ruby played, and Larry Bill had accordions, and Reuben and his three kids, well, just really two of them, had guitars, and Kenny played his guitars. They didn't all play at once, but they did play, and they come up a lot. And then Tick and Vera Doggett, they'd come down maybe once a week. So this was kind of a different life. But in Goodland, what used to be the skating rink and then was a dance place where, when we were in high school and so on, the Vets Club had bought it, and they had bingo in there, but they didn't have dances. But one hotel or restaurant out on the outside of town, they had a basement. When you go into the restaurant, you could either go up the stairs to go into the restaurant, or you could go down the stairs and go down, and they had a dance floor. So that's where we went with Harvey and Joe Sheldon and the Peters, and we went pretty much every Saturday night that we didn't go someplace else. Like we would go down there to this dance place. Well, they went, like I say, pretty often. Well, when Kenny and I had gotten married, why it snowed up right away, and so we were never chivaried. Well, anyway, like I say, we went to the dance partner every weekend with them, and one Saturday night, I don't know why we didn't go, but we didn't go. And I told Kenny, I said, I don't know, I think we should go to the dance. I think something's going to happen. And, well, it did all right. About 1:30 in the morning, they decided they'd chivalry us. I don't know how many came out from Goodland, but there had to be 25 or 30 people came. And about 1:30 in the morning, the horn started honking and so on. So nothing to do but get up. And we still had the cigars in the cedar chest that Kenny and I had bought, 6 years ago, and took them up. Well, you can imagine what a cigar like 6 years old would be. The wrappings was all coming off, and the candy bars, of course, were long gone. But anyway, they all come in the house, and Kenny passed them out these cigars, but I don't think any of them was ever lit. But I kind of think maybe the folks might have had an idea what was going to go on, because Mother had an awful lot of bacon for just the family. So we fixed bacon and eggs for them, and they ate breakfast for that many. And they had bacon and eggs and toast, and I don't know, it was the wee hours before they went home. So anyhow, the stock show in Denver was coming up again. And of course, we wanted to go one more time. So the same 3 couples of us, or 4 couples of us that went to Denver to the stock show. And we all but one couple stayed. We had rooms reserved. Well, Kenny and Abel got to thinking, well, we had rooms, but we didn't know whether Clarice and Eddie had a room or not. Well, prior to this, the maid had pushed a bed, not a bed, springs, and just left it stand against the wall. I don't know where she was taking it, but anyhow, she just left it kind of sitting up there in the hall. Well, Kenny and Emil thought, Paul thought, well, maybe if they didn't have a room, why, they could sleep on that mattress. So they pulled the mattress, took the mattress and put it in the closet and put their coats down in front of it. And I can imagine what that maid thought when she came back and her mattress was gone. Well, in the afternoon, why, when they come back, well, yeah, they had their room, so they moved the mattress back to the hall. Well, anyway, we never ever encountered the maid. So anyhow, I don't know what we done that night. We went out to saw some shows and so on, and the next day, well, they were planned on, getting breakfast and do like we'd always did. Well, Kenny and I, we said, well, we wouldn't go to breakfast with them. We'd just sleep in and we'd meet them later for lunch. Well, they tried to talk us, yeah, you want to go. And we said, well, we weren't going to buy anything. We were leaving. So we wouldn't go with them. We'd meet them the next day. And so they finally agreed, all right. And so the next morning, I don't know how they got a key to our room, or they did, but anyhow, we heard a couple knocks on the door, and they came, and Kenny and I, of course, were still in bed. They said, well, you're going to get up and go with us? And no, we told them, we'd meet them later. Well, instead of them going out, the three guys got on the other side, or on the side of the bed, took a hold of the mattress and said, 1, 2, 3, and they dumped us out of bed. And we went on the floor, and the mattress went right on top of us. And they said, well, we'll see up in one of the rooms later. So we had nothing to do but crawl out from underneath the mattress. I told Kenny, I said, well, we might as well go with them, because and I said, and we don't want to be here when that maid comes in to clean the room. So we got dressed, packed our suitcase, and went up and went to breakfast with them. And I can imagine when that maid came in to straighten up that room, what went on in the room that night. But anyway, we all went to breakfast, and then we went to the stock show that afternoon, and I guess that was probably the last big escapade we had with them. And we went back over to the folks, and about that time, Thanksgiving was coming. Well, the 3 months that we'd stayed with the folks, and I'd usually go get the mail, and I'd stop, and I spent a lot of time with Francis and George, and especially if Jean or Ted happened to be home. Bob wasn't home, but anyway, everybody else from the service and so on was back, and we all went down to Grandma's, and it come to my mind. I thought, whenever the Daisies had a holiday or anything, we always went to Grandma's, and all the time the Andersons. There had been one time that the Andersons were all together, and that was the dinner after Kenny and I got married, that Mother and Kenny's all put together, all the Andersons. And that was the only time that I can ever remember that the Andersons ever went there. Kenny had a lot of aunts and uncles, and I had been in one, and cousins, and I had been in one aunt and uncle's house, and I think she'd had a club there, and we went up there, and that was the only time that I was ever in any of their houses, and they just never ever got together. That like I say, we were all at Grandma's, and they had their card games and so on. And then we got home, and before Christmas, Joanne and Don had come down, and we had Christmas at the folks before we went down to Grandma's the next day. And Joanne and I got to talking about what she was going to wear, because they were going to be married in January, I think it was the 22nd, I'm not sure. And she said, well, she had to decide what she was going to wear, that Don would wear his uniform. And I asked her, I said, well, would you like to wear my dress, a wedding dress and veil? Because Joanne and Betty and I all wore the same size, so we knew it'd fit. And she said, you mean you wouldn't care if I did? I said, no, I'd like for you to wear my dress. So we went to the Cedar just again and took out the dress. And Betty happened to be out there too. And she had a couple formals. And I said, well, you could either wear your pink one or your rose one or blue. And Joanne said, well, Dawn's uniform is blue. Why didn't she wear the blue formal? And so the next day, Joanna decided to take that back. Well, in Christmas Day, we all went back down to Grandma's again, and pretty soon she said, where's Frances? Frances was over there, and I never said anything. I don't think I was the only one that knew it, but pretty soon Grandma asked George again. She said, where's Frances at? And he told her, she said, she's in the hospital having a baby. And Grandma couldn't believe it. She said she was here Thanksgiving, and she didn't look pregnant to me. Well, she was. She spent Christmas Day up in the hospital, and that's where Richard was born. And Richard was the last of the generation. And Paul Days had been the first, so he was 35 years old. So that was the Days generation from 35 till Richard was born. I think it was towards evening, but there was more than one that was surprised at Richard being there. And then we went up to Grandma Albertson had moved back to Colorado Springs. So I don't know whether we didn't go up till the day of the wedding, because I can't remember where we all stayed, but the folks stayed with Grandma. And then Joanne and Don's mother and his brother come out, and they were Don's in the wedding, so we all spent some time together there. And then Kenny's I knew it was time for us to really plan on leaving. And Kenny's folks decided they'd go with us, and we had traded cars again. We'd got a later model car, a Mercury. It was a nice car, but we hated to trade that little blue and silver car that we'd had that we liked so well. But anyhow, we finished loading the truck, and Linda had her cat. She had to take the cat, and it did it. Tommy Pete rode really well. Well, anyhow, I don't know how they got out there the day we left the folks' place, but Kenny and his dad and Linda rode most of the time with them. She liked to ride in the truck, and Kenny's mom and I drove. I drove the car, but Rossi and I took turns driving the car. Well, I don't know how far we went each night, but when we got out pretty close to Meridian, Idaho, the truck broke down, and I don't remember. We drove on into to Meridian and called. Rossi's brother lived there, and So when we got to, I think maybe Rossi and Rhodey might have stayed with the car. I don't know, or maybe we all rode in uh, 2 Meridians and called him, and he told us what shop to take the car to. And so that Kenny might have rode back out with the tow truck driver. But anyhow, they pulled it into some garage that evening, and we stayed in with with Frankie, and I had known his first wife before, but we didn't. They got a divorce, and so he had a new wife that even Rhodey didn't know too well. But anyway, they let us stay with them. We were probably there a week because they had to order parts for that truck and so on. Well, when we got the car fixed, why we drove on in and I guess we drove straight in. We might have had to stop one more night before we got home, and we drove into Eugene, and there used to be we went through Bend first, and we had to drive from Bend. I know we stayed all night in Bend before we come on over to Eugene. And when we drove into Eugene, there used to be a big, I think it was an ice place or something. And anyway, they let us park the truck there. They said we could park there in their yard. They had a big yard till we found a place to live or a place to take it. And so we drove over. The weather was nice, and I can't remember how we got home. It kind of seemed like we drove over the McKenzie Pass. They kept it open at that time. And when we drove into Eugene, we drove through Eugene, we found stayed at a motel about halfway through town, and we must have been there. I imagine we were there a couple of weeks, and Kenny's folks stayed there in the motel with us, and we started looking for a place to either buy or rent or sell, or that was for sale. And his folks usually went with us, and I don't know, we saw so many places. And every place we'd go, like Kenny's dad would either think it was too expensive, or anyway, they didn't know, and no place seemed to suit us, and I began to think we'd never find a place. But one thing, at that time you could cook in the motels, and so Kenny's mother usually, we'd have a lunch, and she'd usually cook supper for us. And finally, it was on North Jefferson Street in Springfield, we found this. It was a little house. It was really too little for us then, but Kenny's dad really, really liked it. It was north part of Eugene, and I think what he liked about it had a pine tree right out in front, and he thought the price seemed all right, and and so we ended up buying this little house, and on the inside it was all knotty pine, and it would have been great for Kenny's folks to live in, because it was just 2 bedroom, and it was little, and so that's where we moved into it.
de pleurs.